Hello, everybody. It's Michael Angelo Caruso. I'm on with one of my favorite people in the world. It's Sylvia Whitlock. How are you, Sylvia?
I am fine. How are you? It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you again. I know that we've talked a few times, but I really appreciate you being on my podcast. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that's watching, if you're watching the video version of this interview, you can listen to the audio version on the Talk to Me podcast platform. That's on Podbean, iTunes, all the major platforms. If you're listening to the audio version, you may want to check out the video version, which is posted on my YouTube channel at Michael Angelo Caruso. Sylvia Whitlock is a fascinating person. She's a bit of history, if you, as they say in Great Britain, a bit of history with regard to an organization called Rotary International. And I appreciate you once again sharing this story, Sylvia. It's so interesting to talk to you today, only a couple days after the United States has been confirmed their first female vice president.
Right, and she's from Jamaica.
I know, and you are too, right?
I can talk Jamaican.
Man, you forgot to say man.
Nobody there does that.
Yeah, right. We'll get into Kamala Harris and I want to talk about women in society today. I want to talk about a bunch of interesting stuff with you. But before we do that, let's go back to Jamaica. What was it like growing up there? And you were there in the early part of your life, correct?
Yes, I was. I went there when I was 5 years old. I left there when I was 15. I never understood why my parents sent me there to grow up with my grandmother. I always thought there was something wrong with sending your kids away somewhere else. But it was probably the best thing they ever did for me, because I really grew up with an attitude that helped me as a Black woman later on. I didn't learn how to hate, although I did have some prejudices. But I think growing up in that atmosphere was a good thing for me. And that's what my mother wanted to do, was get us away from the latchkey environment in New York into a place where we could be free and not ever worry about who didn't like us.
Do you remember the comedian Dick Gregory?
Yep.
You remind me of a joke he said once. He said he didn't learn hate at home, and he didn't learn hate from his family. He had to go to school to learn how to hate.
Oh, wow.
I know he was only kidding. Your parents sent you away, sometimes, and I can see why a young person would think, well, there must be something wrong with me for my parents to send me away. But sometimes there's something wrong with the parents when they send their kids away. Were your parents in a hardship?
No, you know what? You don't think about that until it's way past. My parents sent me away because they lived in New York City. They didn't want their kids growing up and they lived in Harlem. They lived actually on the outskirts of Harlem in a place called Sugar Hill. But they didn't want us growing up in a situation where we were latchkey kids because they were both working, and we'd come home and let ourselves in. And they wanted no backyard. We looked out the window at the backyard, and they wanted us to grow up with freedom to choose what we wanted, to go to good schools, and all of that.
Did Jamaica a good place to grow up? You said it was the best thing that ever happened for you.
Yes, because I grew up with absolutely no persecution or whatever you call it whatsoever. I grew up free. I went to the best school in the island. I had an excellent education when I finally went back to New York. The school I attended in Jamaica was head and shoulders away of what high schools in New York City were like. It was a British school. It was a British school.
British?
But it was a British school, but it was an excellent school. And I went to New York City more than ready to enter college.
Yeah. A little spoiler alert for people that are watching. One of the most, and I know you've done a lot of noteworthy things. You've born and raised children. That's pretty significant. You had a great career in education, very significant. But perhaps what you're most known for is becoming the first female to join Rotary. and then subsequently, of course, you were club president and district governor, and now you're feted on the speaking circuit. What are your thoughts now that that we have a female vice president? Are we making progress in this? I watched the Helen Reddy movie. Have you seen it?
Yeah, you know what? You know what was really interesting? You know, the little video that they showed after Kamala was, declared vice president or whatever. But
Yeah.
the video of her walking down the street and the little girl who was used to integrate blacks in school, remember that little girl walking in front of her, and they merged them together? It's a good thing that happened, okay?
Yeah.
It's a good thing that happened. I'm not sure that because this happened, we can say everything is okay. We have a black vice president and the world, all's well with the world. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the stars really got together and created this result that we see now with the election of Biden and Kamala as his running mate, and so she is the VP.
Yeah.
But I don't think it means that women or black women or Asian women have nothing to worry about anymore. I think it's going to be the same story for a long time. It's just like Rotary. Hey, it took us 11 years, to get them to decide that, yes, it was going to be okay for women in Rotary. And that was just Rotary.
Yeah. For those of you that are unaware of Rotary, it's the largest and, for my money, the best service organization in the world.
Of course.
And it was exclusively for men, founded in 1905 by a gentleman by the name of Paul Harris. It was exclusively a male organization until Sylvia got involved. This was around 1976 or so, Sylvia?
1976, yes.
And tell everybody the story about the Rotary Club of ex-Duarte and how it became the ex-Rotary Club of Duarte. When you look back on it, it's kind of an amusing story, but I'm sure it was high drama back in the day.
At the time, we didn't even think it was a story. Really, superintendent of schools, and a small Rotary Club, and he's thinking, all the people, all the CEOs in my district, because remember, that was the time when Rotary recruited CEOs, manager types.
Yes.
All of them are women. Why can't I invite them to join Rotary? And so he did, because the district officer, the district governor said, hey, that's not a bad idea, Dick. Go ahead and try it. But you know what? The district governor probably knew that Rotary headquarters would not have accepted it, because he said to Dick, when you register these women, don't use their full first names, just use their initials.
Yeah.
We'll know. No one will know. And we'll see. But, so Dick did that. And for about 3 years, Dick was inviting women into Rotary, and they were coming to Rotary meetings, and they were being registered as S. Whitlock and M, whatever, until they had the celebration. Celebrating their 25th year. And then, of course, International always sends people to help clubs, achieving those milestones. And so when the representatives came and the women were introduced, the representatives couldn't believe it. What do you mean? We don't have women in Rotary. What is this? And Dick said, well, this club does, they're all registered. And so,
yeah. Sometimes I feel bad because I love Rotary. I've been a long time member, just like you have, not as long as you. And I sometimes feel bad that Rotary takes it on the chin for being obstinate or closed or rude. And I wanted to get your opinion on this, because it's coming up a lot with revisionism, historical revisionism, how we try to, I think the term is ahistorical, where we transfer today's values and make judgments about what happened back in the past. there were a lot of groups that were primarily male back in the day. And so when Rotary made these inroads and eventually had to be sued to allow women in, it was a black eye. And you do look back and think, couldn't they get in front of this so they didn't have this black eye for them? And yet, maybe it was just the path we all had to go down. We had to have a Sylvia Whitlock or somebody, you know, take point on this and lead the way. Don't you think we've seen this in so many different types of examples in the past?
You know, I think about it a lot because I have never been able, remember that this went on for 11 years. 11 years, 2 generations of people on this. And I'm thinking, I wish I could have talked to someone who was there, who could have explained to me why Rotary didn't want women. For me, the difference was that this was a humanitarian organization. It was a service organization. They were providing service to the community. Isn't the goal to have as many people as you can serve that community? People who are capable, people who are CEOs, people who are manager types, people who want to serve. Shouldn't that be the goal without worrying about whether they wore skirts or pants? In fact, they all wore pants. You know, why make a difference between whether men are going to do this service or men and women are going to do this service? That has never made sense to me, apart from the fact that there were, you know, we know the time, we know what time it was, you know, there were a lot of organizations that had men, but there were kind of private organizations and they were doing their own thing and clubs and so on. But this was a service organization. You know, you need people to help. Women help. Well, that's why my book is called Women Also Serve, you know, and it's not women also serve, it's women also serve.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
It's not women also serve and cook and clean. No, it's women also as well as men serve.
Yeah. We'll tell everybody how to get the book in just a second. Well, my point was that maybe back in 1905 when Rotary was founded, society didn't think about women in the same way. We weren't as inclusive. And by the way, if you look forward, we probably won't be as inclusive in 2020 as we'll be in 2040. Who knows? But times change.
What else can we exclude?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I think we're on the cusp of looking at different descriptions of different types of people and becoming inclusive. I think we're on the cusp of that. You know, it doesn't mean that prejudice is going away, because I don't think that's going to happen for a long time. We're born with a little bit of it in us anyway. You know,
right?
But the kinds of prejudices we have are what make the difference.
I mentioned the Helen Reddy movie, which is on Netflix or someplace. She had her big hits, I think, prior to 1976. But this whole idea of women's lib and burning your bra and women and equal pay was happening in the early 70s. So there was like this groundswell of this movement almost to appreciate women in a more full way. And I think that's probably what, you know, and your efforts, of course, is what tilted everything in that direction, yeah?
Well, that's because things changed after the war. And, you know, wartime and women and men and so on, things changed radically after that. And so when women's lib came in, it was really a response. Women were no longer at home in the kitchen or taking care of the kids or so on. They were out there in the field. They were out there working too. You know, they were doing what men were doing. And so the question began to be, should they have the same rights? Should they have the same salary? We still don't have the same salary. But, you know, and so on and so forth. And it was appropriate for the time because the times had changed. Women out there, you know, they were no longer just behind the scenes.
Somebody reminded me the other day that the Equal Rights Amendment never has passed, which
I think
on the face of things, it seems like a no-brainer, and yet there are people that have apparently made a little case for not passing it. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, that happens. It happens in the same with some of the United Nations Sustainable Goals too that have never passed here. And you know what? There are going to be some people all the time who say, you know, why are we doing this? We did fine without this. What do we need this for? You know, but I'm not. I think again, if we look at the time we're in now, we had more people come out to vote this year than we've ever had in the US.
I know.
I
The
think
record.
are beginning to take some responsibility for making choices and affecting what happens based on the choices they make. No longer are they content to just sit at home and say, oh, we'll let them choose, or so on and so forth. They're beginning to realize that they have a voice. They're finding their voices, and I think that's what you see.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I mean, my voice is as deep as any man's. Jeez, come on.
Your what?
My voice is as deep as any man's voice. I prefer the word all the time.
I prefer the word sultry.
Wow. Yeah.
I have a story for you.
Out of it.
A story for you about, I guess we're chasing how slow it is sometimes for big organizations to find their way. And think about a country that's trying to vote and figure out big issues, you know. I know that you served as governor. What year? Rotary governor?
2012.
Okay, so I served in 16, 17. And in 2015, I did all the training that you did with my significant other, Renee Pothetis. You've met Renee. And we weren't married at the time. And Renee jumped in, you know, both feet into the pool, and she was a remarkable partner for this governor. And a few months into that training year, I was starting to submit receipts for reimbursal of training expenses, Renee's travel and so on. And I was getting reimbursed for my travel, but the reimbursements came back short. And I was doing the math, and I'm like, well, they're only reimbursing for one of us. And so I wrote a letter or made an inquiry to my own district as to why I was only getting part of the reimbursal. And they told me it was because Renee and I weren't married. This was in 2016.
Really?
And when I heard, yeah. And when I heard this, I'm like, first of all, somebody's pranking me. It can't be real. You know, I spent, and I logged my time, 30 hours in my preparatory year. And the 30 hours is a lot of time. Getting the bylaws of the district rewritten so that I could be reimbursed for Renee, who was about to become one of the highest performing governor partners in the history of the district. My point is that I was really disappointed that it took my own district so long to, you know, change their path and accommodate something that they should have been able to accommodate years before. It reminds me of your struggle in a way. Yours was much more high profile and much more, I think, it did much more good for an entire gender of people. But my little battle reminded me of the same thing. It's getting that organization to see what, you know, to stay relevant. Relevance is a problem for Rotary right now. All big organizations, changing times, right?
Yeah, but you know, there's a little undercurrent with that, because I think had she been your daughter and your partner, you know, in that governor year, that they would have reimbursed her expenses. The fact that,
maybe.
Yeah, so there's a little morality undercurrent there. People think, really, you know, and that's what gets us in trouble, is that kind of thinking that we tend, you know, that we have to decide whether people's behavior is okay or not. You know?
When you became the first woman to join Rotary, you joined also as a Black woman. But when you and I have talked about this in the past, I have the sense that that being the female was more important. Do I read you wrong on that, or are they equal? Do you ping pong back and forth?
I don't think anybody knew I was Black, because nobody even, you know, it was just the name. Well, what's an initial? Nobody knew I was Black. until it became public, and some gentleman in South Carolina somewhere called and said, so now that you have women, you're going to have black in Rotary.
They must
And
have really lost. They must have really
yeah,
lost
we
their
said,
stuff when they
hey,
found out.
we killed those two birds with one stone.
Kind of like we did with Kamala, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's exciting. And you're telling the story now on the lecture circuit. I know you've been it's received national coverage when it happened, and you wrote a book about it. I'll try to get the glare off the camera here. It's called Women Also Serve.
Women also.
Yes. Duarte Invites Women to Join Rotary by Sylvia Whitlock. And it's like a mini memoir, although there are a few other aspects of your life in it. You told the story in the book. Oh, and by the way, to get the book, they can just send you an email and you'll give them some instructions. Where can they send the email?
Address and how they want it inscribed, and I will mail it to them.
Great. And where can they send the email?
To 1637 Lemonwood Street.
No, the email. The email.
Sylvia5, Sylvia, Sylvia5 at msn.com.
Sylvia5 at msn.com. Very good. You tell a lovely story, and I've heard you talk about it in front of large audiences, and you can hear a pin drop. I'd like you to tell us that story now. It's the story of if I'm paraphrasing this correctly, you had experienced your own prejudice in when you had ran out of gas. Can you tell us that story and how that was such a big aha for you?
You know, I have told that story many times in the last couple of weeks because we're at that time now where people are interested in that. I was driving in New York City. You're talking about the drive down the Cross Bronx Expressway, and I ran out of gasoline. And it was on a dare because I knew I didn't have enough gas, but I thought I could get home. But I ran out of gas on the freeway, and I had to just pull over on the shoulder and think about what I was going to do, you know. And as I was sitting, I went to the police phone that was sitting in front of me. And I said, I'm out of gas on the freeway. And the man who answered said, so what do you want me to do? And I was just silent. And he said, if you're still there in an hour, call us back. That was the police phone. Okay. Now, he had no way of identifying who was calling, unless he could tell from my Jamaican accent. But so I sat there looking stupid, which is what I was. And a car pulled up on the other side of the freeway. He saw me sitting there. He pulled up.
Sylvia, excuse me, is this day or night?
Day. It was day. It was the middle of the afternoon. He pulled up and he said, what's the matter, baby? And I'm thinking, the guy who got out of the car was a black man with a handkerchief around his head. Everything my mother had said, if you see a guy like that walking towards you, cross the street, right? And so he said, what's the matter, baby? And I said, I ran out of gas. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll go and get you some gas and bring it back. Well, he did. And while I sat there waiting for this guy to come back, I kept thinking, now, what am I going to have to give this guy for this gasoline? Really, a zillion things went through my head. You know, I had been taught, carefully taught, you know, how to avoid people who didn't look right. And he didn't look right. He had a handkerchief around his head, you know, today everybody wears that, but at the time. And so he came back, pulled up his car behind mine, took out a little can of gasoline, poured it in my gas tank, and then he opened the hood and poured some on the carburetor, I think, to prime it or something. And he said, no, can you start the car from there? And he said, how much, I said, how much did that cost? And he said, 25 cents or something. That's when gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. And I had $3. I said, can I give you $3? And he said, no, it cost 25 cents. I thanked him very nicely and I got in my car and I drove home. I was only about maybe 10 minutes from home. But I walked into my house and I thought, what just happened here? Why was that guy, why did I reject him? You know, he was everything I'd been taught to avoid, but he was the one who stopped to help. I mean, and my question is, are people responsible for their color, their appearance, or their behavior? And I realized it was his behavior, it was his attitude that was the important thing and should have been the important thing for me, and not the fact that he was on my list of rejects, as he
Yeah.
was. And it was a learning experience for me. It really was. The change a lot. It made me stop and think about what was going into the choices I was making and why I was choosing to reject some people without
Right.
knowing who they were, and wondering. So for me, it was an important learning experience. And
I
when I
love that
talk
story.
about, I talk about it. Rogers and Hammerstein said you've got to be taught. You've got to be carefully taught. And I apparently had been taught that black guys wearing handkerchiefs on their heads are persona non grata. So
So I love the story, and of course, it's a great lesson. Do you think also that visual triggers or visceral cues are still important in life, that sometimes they are accurate?
yeah, of course they are.
Yeah.
I think they are. But I think you always have to temper that with what you know, with how you really feel, and the reality of the situation. I was
Yeah.
telling somebody that story, and the woman said, she was driving on the freeway in Connecticut and came across this car that was apparently stranded, stalled. And so she pulled up behind it. And the guy who was driving the car was a black guy. And he said to her, "Are you crazy? I can't believe it's the middle of the night and you're stopping here to help a black man on the freeway." That kind of stuff, you know? And she said, "Well, yes, what can I do for you?" And so on. It went from there. But I think visual cues are important, but they're not all there are, and
Yeah.
you have to temper that with what happens.
It's been a while since we've chatted, and the Black Lives Matter movement has made the news, and it was a big headline for many, many months during the summer. What are your thoughts about the protests and some of the surrounding antics? Because you almost can't talk about the protests without talking about vandalism and fire and people getting hurt.
I,
Where
I
do you
think
land on this?
I think the surrounding antics are just what they are too. I think when people get angry enough about something, they lose all sense of reason. And when you are frustrated in the fact that you've tried to do something the right way and it didn't work, then you get angry. And what happens? There's no accounting for it. Some of what's happening, like the looting and the general unrest and so on, probably should not happen. But I think people have to be heard. They have to make themselves heard. I think what's happening, look, my son is a black man, an educated black man. He's an attorney. His first day at work at Berkeley, they challenged him when he was coming through the gate because there was probably a new security guy, and they challenged him. They didn't challenge everybody who drove through, but they challenged him. And that's not supposed to happen. See, that's a visual cue to something that's wrong. Okay, that's a visual cue to something that's wrong. And I think I'm not in favor of wholesale rioting and looting stores and destroying innocent people's things, but I understand the underlying anger that creates that. And if you read the book, if you read Kendall's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, he tells you that people who have come through those kinds of experiences, you can't expect them to behave like normal people, like normal, well-behaved people when they're out there, when they've been provoked or aggravated or assaulted.
Yeah.
That's what happens. That's what you get. And that's what we have done.
Let's, as we wrap up, let's circle back to something we talked about at the beginning of our conversation. We talked about progress. We talked about how sometimes you have to do battle with a convention or a tradition to help people see how out of step they are with reality or relevance. Um, we were 8 years with, I think, one of the finest modern day presidents we've had, Barack Obama. We were on the precipice of having a black vice president, Kamala Harris. And yet BLM is percolating. Are we seeing progress, or are we still one step forward, two steps back, despite these high-profile role models?
Well, it is. I think it is progress, but I think it's maybe two steps forward and one step back. Two steps forward and one step back. It's a little different, because I think to elect a black man as a president was a big step. There are people who never changed their attitude towards blacks in office throughout his entire presidency, and it didn't matter what he did. There was going to still be that negative result. And Kamala, well, she has less of a chance to make that the kind of whatever that Obama was president, and so he had the ability to create that specific effect, in the government. She is going along with Biden, and while she will have a chance to show what she does, hopefully she won't have a fly land on her head.
Yeah.
Because I think the landing place for that fly was really kind of interesting. But I think it's two steps ahead and one step back. The one step back is not merely a step back, but it's for the people who have never moved. The people who have never moved, and there always will be some.
Does it help to talk about color, or at what point do we stop talking about it? At what point do we not celebrate that a woman of color has become vice president? How many do we have to have before it goes away? I'm asking because Denzel Washington's approached about this all the time, about being a black actor in Hollywood, and he bristles. There's a very, very public video of him on YouTube actually giving the interviewer a hard time. He says, "I'm not a black actor, I'm an actor." That's an interesting approach. What are your thoughts on this? When do we stop?
Sidney Poitier was there too. It was the same kind of situation as Sidney Poitier.
Did he?
But I think people will stop saying she's a black woman, and eventually it's a blessing that she's a mixed black woman. So
yeah.
Some people will say she's Asian. Somebody wrote in and said, "How about Asians?" Well, she's Indian, and they said she's Indian. That's Asian. That's okay. But I think there will come a time when just the familiarity of the face and the shading, the coloring, will make a difference. For the people who are black and the people who know that they've been excluded because they're black, that happens. It's like the Japanese in Pearl Harbor. You know if you were excluded because you were Japanese and there was Pearl Harbor. So after a while that disappears, and it will. And I think, especially if, there are already people talking about her record as a district attorney up in San Francisco and the things that she did, because, so you think she's wonderful, no, but this is what she did. Well, that's part of the problem. It's going to happen.
I was doing a Zoom talk the other day. Here we are in the pandemic, and I'm in a hotel room now. My first live gig in 9 months, by the way, my first physical gig. But I was on Zoom, and I was talking about some things I did when I was governor, and I happened to mention that we chartered a new club in the district in 2017. It had something like 68 or 69 people in it. It instantly became the 7th largest club in the district. And I said, and it was a black club. It was 98% African American. And a woman of color on the screen challenged me. And she says, "Well, why do you have to say it's a black club? Why can't it just be a club?" And I thought it was a fair question, and I thought about it long after the call was over. Stephen Covey said that light is a terrific disinfectant. I think if I don't tell people that we started an African-American club of that size, they won't know it was a club of color. I want to promote
They
the
would never
cause.
think it was a club of color.
No. So when I say that they were black, I'm not doing it to cast aspersions or throw shade on it at all, which was, I think, the way this nice lady interpreted it. I tried to explain myself during the call, but she wouldn't have it, man. She said, no, you can't refer to them. And I said, you don't understand, man. There are white people in Rotary that need to hear this. They need to know that it's happening. What are your thoughts? Are you okay when people put that designate black or African American or? And by the way, you can't use African American in Canada. They don't even have a term, a comparable term, I don't think.
That's fine. The other day, I was doing a program, I'm not sure whether it was for Rotary or it was for Scott Burns' group called Being Black, and it was advertised on Facebook. And there was a Rotarian woman who responded and said, I'm not interested in these leftist activities and da 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 da. And she went on, and I'm a Rotarian, and I just want to serve Rotary. And this is Rotary was trying to serve. But there was so much anger in her response, and it was obviously aimed at the fact that this was a black group. The group was called Being Black, Black group. And, and that's this, Kenneth says it in his anti-racist. That's the feeling that we have to disinfect almost.
Yeah.
The people who are still jumping when you say black or whatever. The same way they did the Japanese, when, we
And it's not just a race thing. I just think there's a certain percentage of the population that is intent on being outraged. I mean, they're always going to find something, right? And this happens to be.
But there is a percentage of the population that is outraged at blacks being outraged. Yeah. Too. It's amazing. It's amazing. And there are a lot of people. I can tell a lot of stories about being black. Some of them I didn't even recognize when they were happening to me, like being discriminated against when I first went to college and didn't know what was happening. I can tell a lot of those stories, and people say, really? Did that happen? And yes, it really happened. I remember being friends with two Jewish girls. Now, remember, we complain about Jewish people too. Two Jewish girls in my physiology lab. And in fact, we had the same guinea pig. We worked on the same guinea pig. And I can remember we did everything in school together. We had lunch together. We did everything together. And we were, I thought, best of friends. And one day I was walking on the Grand Concourse one Saturday morning out of school. And I saw these two girls walking towards me. And I had never seen them out of school before. And I got so excited. I was going to see them. And I walked right up to them and they said, hi, and just kept walking. They didn't even call me by name. And I didn't understand what happened. I was just stunned. And I went home and I told my mom this story. And she said, were they white? I said, yeah. And she said, well, hey, you're on the Grand Concourse. It's not the thing to do, is to be white and black on the Grand Concourse. And they just they just cut me dead. And I didn't understand what was happening.
Yeah, were you able to confirm with them later that's indeed what happened?
No.
No.
I don't think I ever talked with them about it after that, because after my mother explained to me what it was, I thought, this is their thing, I guess. And at that time, I wasn't advocating anything. I mean, I was 15, 16 years old. What did I know about this? I couldn't even talk to it intelligently.
Do you think that tolerance helps people with all of these issues? Republican versus Democrat, black versus white, young versus old. Is a level of tolerance like the Swiss Army knife for getting along?
I don't like to call it tolerance. I think inclusion is probably a better word than tolerance.
Okay.
Caring.
Why do you like inclusion better?
Kind of put up with it. you know.
tolerate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Inclusion's a good thing.
Uh, uh,
And Rotary has a new diversity initiative designed to encourage people to be inclusive. I don't know how I feel about that. I just always thought we were inclusive. I don't know why we need a policy on it. I felt the same thing
well,
when Rotary put out.
well, yeah, they made a statement on it that talked about Rotary reflecting what your community looks like, and if it doesn't, then you know, if it does, you have a key to the future and so on. But that was kind of just something like a cloud that was just going over there, and it never really came down, never really rained, you know, and it just nobody considered that it was something to which they needed to pay attention.
Yeah.
And it's,
Well, I admire you so much, and I always enjoy visiting with you. I do believe that shining light on these issues and talking about them is very, very helpful to people, especially people that haven't heard the story before, especially people that are helping forge the path forward. And I really appreciate your time today.
well, I appreciate your thinking that I'm worth listening to. And I will talk to you anytime, Michael, because I remember when I first met you with Jennifer, and Jennifer is going to be the president.
I know. That's 2 steps forward for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Sylvia Whitlock.
But interesting. That's not going to be 2 steps forward and 1 back. It's not.
No?
Number one, Jennifer earned that position. She earned that position, and they came through it a long way. And it's not we're going to do this, but we're not going to do this again. It's going to be okay.
I keep telling people, we should celebrate our first female president of Rotary International, but we should be taking an eye off the first one and start thinking about the second one and the third one, because if we just have one, that is a step back. That was 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see some more youth. I'd like to see people of color. I'd like to see a more representative gender mix. Talk about representing the community. 50% of the community is female.
There is a gender mix that we need to have. And of course, you know, we have a female president coming up in Rotary. We have yet to have, people will say Carolyn Jones was a Black person. I don't think Carolyn Jones thinks she was Black. From Alaska when she was the first trustee. But it's going to be interesting to see how that moves.
Well, exciting times ahead. You made it all happen. We stand on your shoulders. This is the book, everybody. Women Also Serve.
You know, that's a district governor giving drops to a little boy in India. Yeah,
lovely.
That was wonderful. Right.
Polio eradication being one of Rotary's major initiatives, everybody. If you want a signed copy of this book, you can reach out to Sylvia online. It's Sylvia5, the number 5, right? At msn.com, everybody. Sylvia Whitlock, you're a hero of mine. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Michael, and have a wonderful time. I keep enjoying your little, the boy band. Where's the boy band today?
The first boy band.
Oh, boy. Okay. It's nice to talk to you. Always nice.
Same here. Bye, Sylvia.
Okay. All righty.